Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Workers' Mic, powered by the Midwest Coalition of Labor, right here on 720 WGN. My name is Ken Edwards with the Midwest Coalition of Labor. Sitting to my left is Ed Maher with the International Union of Operating Engineers. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Ken. How's it going today?
Really, really good. And for the first time, at the beginning of the show, we have a guest.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's going to be our whole show guest.
I love it.
Yeah. Introduce our mystery guest.
His name is Travis Ketterman, and he is with the law firm of Ketterman, McGann, and Rioux. And if you noticed, Ketterman was first, which means he's most important. So welcome, Travis.
I'm usually the least important person in the room, but hey, happy to be with friends talking about stuff we care about.
Absolutely. Good to see you, Travis.
Yeah, it's badass that you're here. Let's and we'll talk. We'll get into who Travis is in a little bit, but I want to start with a continuation of the discussion that we've been having, which is 2023 being the year of the worker, and some interesting things that have gone on in the past couple of weeks, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, almost every day I'm reading stories or getting email alerts about different unions organizing, winning elections, and it's almost become commonplace at this point every day to see a new local group organizing, and it didn't used to be like that. So sometimes I have to remind myself how extraordinary these times actually are.
I know you would go for years without reading anything positive about labor, or just, constant negative and, corruption and, union losses and the union decline and the decline in the middle class. And you're absolutely right. This, you're starting to see over the past couple of years workers standing up for themselves. Right?
And winning, going out and trying to organize and actually being successful.
Yeah, it's badass. So, a couple of quick ones, and I'll run through a couple of things that struck me, and I think we'll drill down on at least one of them. One is in New York, nurses went on strike, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think this New York City nurses strike encapsulates everything we're talking about.
Yeah.
Everything that's right for workers, everything that's right about the labor movement. And you have people that are obviously concerned about their wages, but more importantly, what fueled that strike was their concern for their work conditions. They were concerned that the patients weren't getting the care they need because there were too few nurses.
Right.
And a 3-day strike of 7,000 nurses.
Yeah.
Just unbelievable. It goes to what you said, Ed, is, every day we're seeing victories by workers. They're doing the right thing for themselves, but for their communities. And if you think about what fueled this strike was their concern for their patients.
Right.
And as a result of that 3-day strike, they won. And the tentative agreement that was reached this week, for the first time in their contracts, there's going to be nurse-to-patient ratios.
Right.
Right.
That's a win for the nurses. That's a win for the patients in those hospitals.
Absolutely.
That's something that's been fought for. Nurse to patient, student to teacher ratios. Ratios have been something that's been fought for in a lot of different strikes and labor disputes and contract negotiations nationwide. And it seems like they're never able to actually get there. Mm-hmm. So this is a huge deal. Yeah, and hopefully it sets a precedent.
I hope it absolutely sets a precedent. The teachers if you remember the teacher strike, years ago, right? That was one of their issues, right? Our classes are too full, right? Mm-hmm. And so, kudos to the nurses in New York for getting this thing accomplished.
Yeah, and look at how they're going to solve that nurse-to-patient ratio. They're going to hire more nurses.
That's right.
Good jobs. 170 people are going to get a good job because these 7,000 nurses stood up instantly, 170 nurses. Also, there's partnerships with different educational institutions in the Bronx so that people who want to become nurses are going to get the opportunities. I mean, again, that's just why labor exists. That's why these worker rights are important.
Yeah, people, constantly say, the union's in it for themselves. They're lazy. They just want less work and more money. And what this showed, I think, it's the exact opposite, right? They literally said, we're overworked. We want better working conditions. But more importantly, our patients are getting screwed because we don't have the staff.
Right.
And
right.
Look at Chicago. we don't have enough cops.
Right. That's for sure.
Right. We simply don't have enough cops, Lori. But that will change. But we just don't have enough cops, and it's just there should be some sort of ratio. Firefighters have it, right? X number of guys on a truck. They're very good at that, by the way.
Yeah, I don't know how many guys are supposed to be on the truck, but I know that's something that's been protected in every single contract.
Yeah, the firefighters are very good at that.
Yes.
So, so that's one of the things that happened. I also saw that Pennsylvania, it's not a state, it's a commonwealth.
That's right.
The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which includes Philadelphia, where my son goes to college, which is one of the most horrible cities in the entire country.
Terrible sports fans, the worst sports fans anywhere.
I'm joking, not really.
I'm not joking.
A good Philly cheesesteaks.
Do you get it with Cheese Whiz?
You got to, right?
That's
When
what I
in Rome.
hear. Yeah.
I've never had one, and I never will.
No.
This is disgusting.
Do you remember when the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup in Philadelphia and they were skating around hoisting the cup and the entire stadium full of Flyers fans stayed to boo their hearts out for the entire thing? That says it all, everybody.
Well, back to why this is a positive thing. Pennsylvania, I think, floated a workers' rights amendment to their constitution.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, it's the first state to quickly follow up on the success in Illinois.
How badass is that?
It's fantastic. It was.
Copycats are good.
Hey, well, you know
We're all
what?
for it.
We were hoping that this would start a movement, and it was Representative Elizabeth Fiedler. She's a representative from South Philadelphia, and she put forth legislation that would put into the Constitution protections for organizing and collective bargaining, which is a huge deal. I mean, we're seeing momentum on this now, which is so important because the momentum has come the other way for decades, half a century or more.
Well, I think one of the lessons of this is you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
If you're a worker out there who needs protection, if you're a union out there that's going to protect these workers, we look to see what we've done before in the past,
Right.
What's worked and what we need to tweak. And I think that's why Illinois was a leader in passing the Workers' Rights Amendment, and we're seeing the fruits of that. Other people can copy. There's nothing wrong with that.
For sure. I mean, the other side's been doing it for how many decades now? I mean, the American Legislative Exchange Council, all these right-to-work laws and things.
National
ALEC.
Right to Work Association.
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
just take it and put it in a box and email it around the country,
Absolutely.
and the next thing you see is all these state houses pushing this stuff.
Right,
So,
but God forbid workers should stand up and do the same thing state after state, or share information or what works, et cetera. Now you're finally starting to see this thing,
Right.
and good. And so Michigan, another one. I know that they're going to try and overturn right to work in Michigan because they now control, the Dems control 3 houses.
yeah, the blue trifecta.
And I also believe, I've heard through the grapevine anyway, that they may also try and run a constitutional amendment same as workers' rights, so they don't have to constantly flip back and forth, right?
But the message is, as election have consequences.
Right.
And,
For sure.
when worker-friendly candidates win because workers back them, then we expect something from them when they're governing.
Well,
and
fine.
Michigan's a perfect example. Illinois has been a good example
Right.
of our friends helping our friends.
Yeah. Well, but funny you should say that because we expect something, right? We want something, and we should finally start to push for it. Last week we talked about, how to get a first contract. Well, let's push for legislation that helps us get a first contract, right? Here in Illinois, we push for, infrastructure and capital bills and things like that. Recently here in Illinois, they passed a bill for paid leave.
Right.
And
Sick
I
leave.
think it doesn't start till next year.
January 1st, 2024.
But each employee in the state of Illinois will get up to 40 hours of paid leave for whatever they want,
No questions asked, no documents required.
right? Imagine that. Now,
We're catching up to the rest of the world here in Illinois.
yeah, well, and in union land, we take that for granted,
Right.
right? But, let's say you're working non-union, the boss can say, there's no such thing as paid leave here, right? And quite frankly, in the building trades, we don't have paid leave, right? You work, you get paid.
Exactly.
You don't work, you don't get paid.
Right.
A little bit of a different circumstance, but that was kind of cool. And then I guess it's assistant administrators and principals now have the right to collectively bargain in Illinois as well.
Right.
So, I mean, here's just a few things that labor being on the offense.
Right. This is all things that have happened in the past week.
Yeah, right?
This so you almost have to pinch yourself sometimes. 2023 really is the year of the worker, and it's going to continue to be if we keep having things like this popping up every single week.
And they should. And
Yeah.
we need to be on
It's
the
about
offense,
time.
right?
And think about, this show's made 2023 the year of the worker. That's our resolution. It's a good, solid resolution. People vow to eat better and exercise because it's good for their body.
Right.
People vow, Ed, you're going to read more books in 2023. It's good for your mind. The year of the worker is good for our economy. It's good for our communities. It's good for the workers. It's the right thing to do.
It also was just kind of catchy. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It
now,
was-
spoiler alert, 2024 is probably going to be the year of the worker again.
You're listening to WGN. Sorry, let me take that again. You're listening to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN. We will be right back with more Travis Ketterman and Ed Maher and Ken Edwards. Bye. Welcome back to 720 WGN, Workers' Mic. I'm Ken,
I'm Ed.
and he's Travis.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everything in between.
And I've got to say, I'm sitting here and I'm looking at Travis, and Travis is an attorney, as we mentioned at the opening of the show, but he is just excited to be here. And I know that I know Travis for probably 10 years now, and I know that he is just a true activist when it comes to union issues and labor issues. And it makes him, so effective at what he does. And so, I mean, I'd just like to say how much I appreciate everything that you do, Travis, and ask you to just tell us a little bit more about what you've done, your background.
No, I appreciate the kind words. It's not a job when it's
Right.
a passion,
Yeah.
and you don't need a hobby when what you do during the day
Absolutely.
fuels your interest. And workers, unions, I believe in them. I've always believed them. Both my grandfathers fought in World War II, severely injured, came back, became members of unions, had good jobs, raised good middle-class families. My dad was a teachers union president up in Wisconsin. My mom was actually a union steward for school secretaries.
Love it.
And so I'm from Wisconsin, so I got cheese in my blood and
God.
union rights. So I'm happy to be here. I couldn't think of anything more I'd rather do for a living than represent
How'd you
workers.
get to Illinois?
Law school. I chased my wife. We met at Marquette and chased her back to Illinois. And 30 years later, we're still here.
Well, we're glad she brought you back.
Yeah. So you tell us about the firm real quick.
Yeah, so McGann, Ketterman Rioux is a law firm here in
I
Chicago.
thought Ketterman was first. That's what you said off air.
But right, we'll have to change the letterhead when I get back. All we do, 100% of what the law firm does, is represent unions and their employee benefit funds.
Okay. And how many attorneys you got?
We got about 12
Okay.
full-time attorneys of counsel.
It's nice to be doing just one thing, right? And I find that union law firms that do workers' comp or personal injury or some family law, some criminal law, in my humble opinion, they get spread a little thin. And you guys get to focus solely on unions and health and welfare funds.
No doubt. I mean, if you have a problem with your heart, you want to see a cardiologist.
That's right.
And if you're a worker, you want to have someone who knows what they're doing in the interest of labor law.
Yeah, well, good. That's awesome. I want to tell a quick story, and Travis, you can jump in here. Back to the Midwest Coalition of Labor in 2016, right?
Yeah, November.
Yeah, we knew we were in trouble, and somebody introduced me to Travis. Travis and I's world never really collided, and we talked on the phone. And Travis and I were both of the mindset that we knew what was coming, which is the Janus case and right to work from the public sector and right to work all over the Midwest and things of that nature. And we were of a like mind to say, hey, why don't we do something about this finally, right?
Yeah, we knew. I remember the conversation well. I was actually in Florida speaking at a foundation event for employee benefit funds.
Yeah.
And we knew the next 4 years were going to be rough. Right. We knew the next 4 years were going to be rough for employees and unions in particular. But, Ken, you and I had the same mindset. In when you have challenges, you have opportunities.
Right.
That's always been the hallmark of labor organizations.
Yeah.
Is you take the challenges in the workplace, you take the challenges politically, you take the challenges economically in society, and you make something happen. And luckily, the leaders of the various the unions here in Illinois took that conversation, and the MCL was born.
Yeah, and our vendors affectionately call them the heads of the five families.
That's right.
But each union at that point assigned an attorney to kind of get this thing off the ground. And Travis was the attorney for the carpenters. And I was one for the operators. We had one for Local 399 of the operators and the IBW as well.
And the laborers.
And then we had Joe Healy, who was on the show previously from the laborers. And we formed this little committee. And, we had the heads of the five families there at times. And that's how the MCL was born, with 5 unions. And today we have 200 plus thousand members in 11 states, and 300 plus locals. So it is it's grown in leaps and bounds. But that was the genesis. It was like literally a phone call between Travis and I.
We were on the phone. I'd be high-fiving you in fist bumps if we were in person. But the people watching me talk to you probably thought it was pretty strange. But
yeah,
very passionate.
Yeah.
But that conversation's a lot like we've talked about first contracts and workers. It's exactly the same model.
Right.
You have some people that have a passion. Yeah. You have a people who said the status quo is not good enough.
Right.
And we're going to get together.
Yeah.
And we care about it.
Yep.
And it's slow at first.
That's for sure.
But you get some momentum. You get the right people. You get a plan. You get information. Boots on the ground.
Right.
It's really no different than what workers do when they're trying to get their rights protected.
Look, you made a good point off the air. People join AARP. They join Costco, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they join all these organizations. Why not join together and, like the nurses did, fight for better working conditions, fight for your passion, which is patients, students, whatever that particularly might be. Get that first contract is, as we talked about last week, it's tough. But why is it important? Like, Travis, you tell me. Like, what do you think? Why is that first contract so important?
The first contracts, you're planting the seeds. It's the first of what you expect to be many.
Right.
And I think what's important about that first contract is, one, you establish tone. You establish your credibility with both the workers and, quite frankly, with management in the union.
Yeah.
That the days of being pushed around are over.
Right.
The days of being disrespected are done.
Yep.
The days of not getting a living wage and decent benefits are over. And I think it's important with the first contract is that you keep the momentum going. Your two biggest fears in a first contract is the workers become disengaged or disillusioned.
Right.
And the way you do that is through communication and having a plan. But I look at it as a three-legged stool. All workers, for their dignity of their human value, are worthy of three things: a good wage, health benefits, and pension benefits when they retire. And you're not going to have the best of all those things right off the bat,
Right.
but you're planting those seeds. So you should get some level of health benefits for not only for the worker, but for the worker's family.
Absolutely.
You should have some seeds of a pension so that at the end of that career, you can retire with dignity.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I've said before, in presidential elections for as long as I can remember, as long as I've been alive, I've always heard people complain or candidates say that they're going to do things to help people earn more money, have better health care, and be able to retire, while they're still young enough to enjoy it. So these are things that all Americans want. All working Americans want this. And these are the foundations that unions are built upon, is fighting for these very, very simple things. So it seems that society is finally caught up and realized what we're out here doing.
And you've made the point repeatedly on prior episodes. It's not just good for those workers.
Right.
It's good for the communities in which they live. Because when they have that just wage, when they're not just barely making it by living paycheck to paycheck, but they have that little bit extra, the middle class spends that in the restaurants.
Right.
Correct.
They spend that.
When you say restaurants, you mean bars.
Bars.
Yeah, some of them have food.
Exactly.
Nachos.
Chicken wings.
Well, yeah, Dale Pearson was on last week, and he gave the number that I think our economy is 70% based on consumer activity. So all of a sudden, if everybody doesn't have money to spend, the economy shuts down. And so workers having more disposable income to buy the things they need and the things that they want, is good for America. It's good for everybody. And every worker should be fighting for these things, and everybody who wants to see a stronger economy, better stock prices, everything, should be supporting them for doing it.
It's the right thing to do for our economy. It's the right thing to do for our towns and counties. It's the right thing to do for workers.
Right.
And the right thing to do for the country, quite frankly. I'll tell you, I want to follow up on something that we talked about last week, or maybe it was a couple of weeks ago, and that was the intelligentsia coffee workers, that win with the IBW Local 1220.
Mm-hmm.
Their business manager, John Rizzo, was kind enough to send me just like a little quick cheat sheet as to what they got in that first contract. And I'm just going to tick it off. They got labor management meetings where management has to sit down with labor and talk about working conditions. They have a grievance and arbitration procedure and just cause, which means that the employer can't just say, hey, you're fired. no more employee at will.
Yeah, just cause is about the most basic foundation for a union contract. It's something you have to have.
And it's a huge deal, knowing that you can go to work and you're not going to be fired because the boss doesn't like you.
Right.
And it's just fantastic. They got arbitration. They got seniority. So if, God forbid, there's a layoff, it goes, last hired, first fired. Seniority should mean something, right?
Yeah.
Makes sense. They got minimum shifts. They got vacation pay. They got paid parental leave. They got paid lunch. So I think in intelligentsia land, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they work 6-hour shifts. Well, they used to have to be there 6.5 hours because they got a half-hour paid break. Sorry, a half-hour unpaid break. Mm-hmm. Now they get a half-hour paid break, so they're working 5.5 hours but getting paid for 6. That's a raise. Right there. And then they got raises and they got training and, et cetera. So, that's a big win. And like you said, that sets the standard then, Travis, for the other coffee shops that are unionizing.
It's a big win, but it also points out to what I've seen in my experiences. It's not just initially about the wages.
That's right.
There's always something else that at some point triggers, I'm not going to put up with it anymore.
Yeah.
The workers will put up with being unpaid properly for a long time, but it's always that other thing. There's some working terms and conditions. We talked about the New York City nurses.
Right.
Another example of, I just negotiated a contract. Their big thing was on call.
On call.
And there was an issue of they could only have 15 minutes to get to someplace. Well, try to get anywhere in Chicago area in 15 minutes. You can't do it.
Across the street. We've got to take a quick break, but we've got Travis Ketterman here, and we're going to have him stay in the studio for a little while longer. So come back and join us on the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN. I'm Ken. He's Ed.
Yep.
We still have Travis with us. Thanks, Travis, for sticking around.
My pleasure.
Absolutely.
So before in the last segment, you were talking about how the Midwest Coalition of Labor was created in response to the Janus decision from the Supreme Court.
Yep.
And how challenges that are faced by the labor movement typically result in some sort of innovation or original thinking or big ideas that actually provide new opportunities. So, in the vein of that, this week there was oral arguments in the Supreme Court for a new case. It was Glacier Concrete, and this is something that has gone sort of under the radar completely in the news, but it is extremely consequential for workers because in the last 10 years, I would say, anytime the Supreme Court starts to take a gaze at workers' rights, it's never good for workers.
That's for sure.
And the deck is completely stacked. So I think, Travis, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the case, but I know people are worried that this could, take away workers' rights to strike.
Yeah, I think the facts are important, like they are in any case.
Yep.
And so you had a Teamsters union who represented these concrete truck drivers, and the strike occurred while a number of these drivers were already out on the big concrete trucks that spin. We've all seen them around. Sure. And so because the strike commenced, they returned the trucks to the yard, but the union members kept the trucks spinning. Yep. They, obviously bad things are going to happen if the concrete hardens in the trucks, but that's not what the union did. They kept the concrete truck spinning.
Right.
The management then had to dump the concrete because they didn't have enough people. And the employer then sued, saying, you destroyed our property. That concrete was unusable, and we want to sue for damages. And so it really becomes a destruction of property lawsuit. And the unions have been protected in their concerted activity. This Supreme Court doesn't really care about precedents.
No.
It's unconservative conservatives.
Yeah, in any setting.
Exactly, and much like a Janus, they didn't care about Beck. And so, I think given the nature of the court's makeup, given the nature of the questions that were asked on Tuesday at oral arguments, I think we know how this turns out. It doesn't turn out for unions, but we'll adapt.
So unions would then have to, in the eyes of these justices, wait until the concrete has been poured and then they could strike, and that would be okay? It takes away all of the leverage that workers have in a strike situation, or at least takes away their freedom to decide when to withhold their labor.
See, I'm the eternal optimist. So what this case is going to say is that theory of the destruction of property is a valid theory. But I think when you apply it to the facts of this case, so obviously we'd like not to have to fight the battle.
Right.
The union victory would be you can't sue for destruction of property type damages.
Sure.
But what the union members did in this was right. And so even if the suit continues, I wouldn't put up with the fact that we concede. What we did was right. And I think what that means is, again, it's the theme of today. In challenges come opportunities.
Absolutely.
What that means is we're going to have to be better prepared. We're going to have to be more creative. We're going to have to be more organized. We're going to have good business representatives leading these unions because there's this threat of this type of lawsuit that hasn't existed. But I don't think we back down. We don't back down for 1 minute. We just become stronger and smarter.
Absolutely. And you said earlier during the break that, the unions are, the good ones anyway, push the envelope, push it hard, right? And, come up with creative ideas as to how to get around this constant attack on workers.
Right. Exactly. My friend Dale Pearson talked about it last week with defamation cases, and I think that's instructive for what's going to happen with the Glazers case. We know what the law is. Yep. You can't say something that's not true or that a reckless disregard for the truth.
Yep.
But we act within those boundaries.
That's right.
And so Glazer's case is going to give us some ruling.
Yep.
And we'll act within those boundaries. But we're going to push the envelope.
Right.
We're going to stay aggressive. We're just going to be better organized and smarter about it.
And we have to be.
And I don't think the Teamsters did anything wrong, and I don't think they destroyed property. So bring it on.
The simple fact that they kept the trucks running so that the concrete wouldn't be spoiled seems like it's evidence that they were trying to not damage property, not create a loss.
100% agree.
I don't see how. This is what drives me crazy. It's almost one of those things where it's like, get back to work. Kind of like what the Biden administration did to the railroads. Get back to work. Like, you have a fundamental First Amendment right to stop working, and quite frankly, you should be able to stop working anytime you want. What happens if, let's say, take this to its logical conclusion. There's 3 workers that are not in a union shop, and they decide to stop working. Right? Mm-hmm. They're going to walk out on strike, which is their right to do, whether they're in a union or not. Who are they going to sue? Are they going to sue the actual workers now for, their coffee got cold? I'm not kidding. Like, what's going to happen in that instance? You want to talk about short-sighted and wrong, the wrong direction. That's it. And once again, the Dems, the AFL-CIO, the people that are pushing for union rights have an opportunity to pass laws in this regard. Right? When was the last time the NLRA was changed? 1970 maybe? There was an amendment to it? I don't know. I have no idea.
Right.
I should know this as a lawyer, but I don't know much.
Very narrow. Very narrow.
Yeah. I got a law degree, But you understand what I'm saying? In other words, like, why not change the law? We talked last week about interest arbitration, making that the law of the land. Let's change the law to protect a strike, for Christ's sake.
The legislative branch has failed to do anything for workers, whether it was the PRO Act, whether it was card check under Obama. They have failed to occupy the playing field on behalf of workers, and so laws are being changed, but it's being done by the judicial branch. And
it's being done on a state level, right, or a local level. Yeah. And it's not, we're not relying on the federal government, quite frankly, to do anything. The infrastructure bill is fantastic, right? It's good for the economy, good for workers, good for unions, good for non-unions, right? Good for companies. It's good for everybody. Can't complain about that. But in terms of pure legislation, like you said, they don't do anything for us.
Right.
And we have to do it ourselves.
We have to stay on the offense. The bad thing about the Glazers case is we're going to have to play defense a little bit. But we need to, with our friends in public office, is to play offense.
That's right.
And there's just a few things that'll fundamentally change the landscape. Card checks.
Sure.
Interest arbitrations.
Absolutely.
FMCS after 90 days. Bargaining after 10 days of the initially being certified.
Yeah.
This isn't rocket science.
Right. No.
And it shouldn't be a heavy lift because it's the right thing to do.
And it's good for the workers. It's good for the economy. It's good for America. But for some reason, the fact that we can't get this accomplished kind of shows you how unlevel the playing field is when Congress and the judicial system are controlled by, like you said earlier, Ed, like the ALEC, group of the world, right? These multi-billionaires that have an agenda, and that is to make as much money as humanly possible, and it's on our backs, and we have to stand up and fight back. I think you're seeing labor do that right now, And it's a good place to be right now, I think.
Yeah, we're seeing it in Illinois. We're seeing it in Pennsylvania. We're starting to hear whispers of it in Michigan. All these states that have been kind of little gentle pushes down for the last 10 years, 20 years, they're starting to see that this can be done. So if it can be done at a state level, maybe that sets the tone for what can happen at a federal level. I mean, everything has to start somewhere. And I hope that we're seeing something early that will, be able to tell the next generation that we saw it start.
Generals win wars by winning battles.
Right.
And the unions need to win the war by winning battles. And that's
right.
taking these things maybe piecemeal and getting card check, which means that you don't, if more than a majority of the workers in a workplace want to be union, they've signed documents that you don't need an election because bad things happen when employers can stall and intimidate. We talked about captive audience and other sessions or shows that you've had. Get these little segments, get these battles. We win the war by winning the battles.
Illinois public workers have card check, right? Did you know that, Ed?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
of course I knew that, Ken. Come on, man.
Newsflash.
I mean, hold on. No, Ken, tell me more about it.
They get a union by, signing cards, a majority of cards. And once card check passed, Ed, I didn't go to a single election in the public sector during my career at 150. Not one. Because what's the point, right? It gives them the opportunity to just pound us. That being said, I wouldn't go in there with 51% of the cards either. I would demand from the workers that we had 95% of the cards signed. And we did. And it showed the employer that, these guys are serious. We're not going to beat them. And it worked really well. And it helped us raise the standard of living for thousands of employees and their families and their communities, and it works.
Well, what's the argument against it? Because again, the national labor policy is supposed to be about encouraging.
The argument against it is a great question, and I think the argument against it, of course, is that corporations are now people and they have free speech.
Well, right. So if you've got 10 workers and 9 of them sign a card saying that they want to be a union member, then the response from from the federal government is, okay, sounds great. You guys clearly want a union. We're going to give the company a few months to beat the hell out of you until you don't want that anymore, and then we'll have an election.
To threaten you and fire you.
And that's, is that about right, Travis?
The anti-workers don't want to give away one of their biggest tools.
Right.
And that tool is delay.
Yeah.
Captive intimidation.
Intimidate.
Absolutely.
Coerce. Threaten.
Look, Travis, I just saw, I think it was yesterday, that the NLRB confirmed the Amazon union election in Staten Island.
Right.
When was that election?
Over a year ago.
Okay. So step one, they confirmed it. Amazon has already said, well, we're going to appeal that now to the full board.
Right.
Right? Okay. That's another year. After that, they're going to lose. Then it goes to what? Circuit court or district court?
Circuit court.
Circuit court, right? So that's
any circuit court too. They can go DC or where they're at, so they'll forum shop. They'll try to find the most conservative courts.
Of course. And that's going to take years, right? And after that, it's Supreme Court. So, you're literally talking about years and years and years from the time you won that election to the time you not get your first contract to the time you get to sit down at the bargaining table.
And when it's all said and done, not a single worker who participated in that election will still be working at Amazon.
Because they'll be retired by then. They'll be 100 years old. Well, I hope that's not the case. You are listening to the Workers' Mic. We've been really, really lucky to have Travis Ketterman here with us today. Travis, can you stick around for one last segment?
Twist my arm.
Take it home.
Happy
with
to
us.
be here.
All right, you're listening to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN. I'm Ed Maher with Ken Edwards, and we've had Travis Ketterman. And I wanted to come back in off the air. We were having an interesting little conversation, and a couple of weeks ago, we talked about what our favorite labor movies or worker-friendly movies are. And I mentioned Matewan, which was about the coal mines, and I got some pushback from Travis, who did not agree with that being the best worker movie, and he feels pretty strongly about this. So I think it's only fair to give him the floor and and push his alternative. So what do you got, Travis?
Hey man, Ed, in 10 years, this is probably the only way we've disagreed. But
how about it?
You got to go with Roger and Me.
Roger and Me,
classic movie where you have Michael Moore in one of his first movies that probably put him on the map. But the premise of that movie, it's got to be 30 years now.
Yeah.
Is GM closes this plant in Flint, Michigan, and these people lose their job, and it just decimates every part of the community.
It was 35,000 jobs.
35,000 jobs gone to make shareholders a couple pennies on their shares.
Where did they move did they move the plant to the south or overseas?
I don't know, but I do know Michael Moore sets out to find Roger Smith, the chair of GM, to just explain, hey, do you know the consequences of your actions? And I think the lesson, that why I love that so much, is the humor and the sarcasm are a great way to send a message. It's like when we do handbills and banners. Why do we use rats in the community? Because it gets people's attention.
Sure.
We don't pass out treatises on economics. We pass out handbills that poke fun of people, that use graphics, and that's how we communicate our message. That's why I think it's the best labor movie out there.
Yeah, and there was a woman there who had lost her job, and she had to resort to cooking rabbits and squirrels and things like that, and and so he was trying to find the chairman to just show him, like, do you see that a couple dollars to your shareholders have done this to an entire city, have taken people from good middle class jobs to eating, wild roaming rodents on the street. Like, it's and the best thing about it is it's not based on a true story. It's not inspired by a true story. It was a documentary. It's a true story. These are real people.
And those real people were the people who built those cars that made that money for the shareholders,
of course,
that returned that money to their communities. In this case, it was Flint. That's everything we've been talking about.
All right, you got me, Travis. I'm gonna watch it this weekend. I have to find where I can get it streaming, but I will make a point of watching it at some point later on today.
I'll bring the popcorn.
All right, cool. Yeah, come on over.
I will too.
You're not invited, Ken.
Oh, God damn it! You know what else is that? What about the Jeep? Right, I've talked about this a couple weeks ago. Jeep Cherokee.
Yeah.
Not Grand Cherokee, which is still made in Detroit. Jeep Cherokee, which is made right here in Illinois, are going to move to Mexico.
Right. It was out of Belvedere, right? That plant out on the side of I-90 that you see. That's got nothing going on at this point.
Unbelievable. I mean, and I drive a Jeep Cherokee, which I'm going to burn on air on our YouTube channel. Like
you can listen to it on the radio. You can hear the burning.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm going to collect the insurance money.
It's going to be the loudest fire we've ever heard.
I'm not going to commit insurance fraud. Listen,
delete that part.
Yeah, we would be remiss in not mentioning that tomorrow is a federal holiday.
Absolutely.
Actually, and what is tomorrow?
Tomorrow is Martin Luther King Day.
That's exactly right. And why is that important to labor?
Well, a lot of people don't know what Martin Luther King was doing in the days before he was shot, but he was walking with picketers, garbage truck drivers.
That's right.
For an Ask Me strike.
That's right. And this is in 1966, I believe?
1968.
1968. And I didn't even know this until I really started reading up on this or refreshing my recollection, that the reason that these garbage workers, the sanitation workers, went on strike is because two of their coworkers were killed. I didn't know that, all right? Or if I did, I forgot, and shame on me for forgetting. But this goes back to what we were talking about, that the garbage men, my understanding, were driving trucks that were dilapidated, weren't working, and these guys got killed as a result of that, and they went on strike for it. Right?
The worker said enough.
That's right. And they had no union at that point. There was no public sector labor law in Tennessee. I don't think there's any labor law in Tennessee right now to begin with. Didn't they just pass, guaranteed right to work forever in Tennessee?
Yeah, they put right to work into their constitution.
Yeah, so, a lot has changed. It's great to see in Tennessee. But that rhymes.
Very good, Ken. That's a very good one.
Thank you so much. But Martin Luther King was down there to march with these sanitation workers, and he did, and then he got killed.
Yeah.
And like a week later, they recognized the union, and it took another year, I think, to get a contract. They had to threaten to go on strike again. But that's what Martin Luther King was doing when he was killed, and he was there for the workers. And I think it's important to remember that while we quote unquote celebrate Martin Luther King Day, or at least commemorate his life, but understand that his last days were spent with workers.
Right. He had enemies across the country for many, many reasons. And as unfortunately, this proved, it wasn't safe for him to be out in the open all the time.
Right.
And he knew that, but it didn't really matter because he had an opportunity to help people that were fighting for something. And he took to the streets, marched the streets with them, held their hands, and unfortunately paid the ultimate price. But I think this story of these sanitation workers goes back to what Travis was saying about you can underpay workers, you can mess with their benefits, and sooner or later something will happen.
Right.
And a lot of times it comes down to safety, avoidable accidents, or just gross negligence where workers are saying if we're worth so little to you that you would, completely ignore our rights to have a safe workplace where we can go home at the end of the day, then we're going to stand up and we're going to ask you to do better. We're going to force you to do better.
We have to.
Right. And MLK stood for that.
The message that he had in Memphis that week was consistent with his whole career, the human dignity of the person.
That's right.
And in this case, it was the human dignity of the worker.
Yeah.
There's a moral aspect to what we do.
Yeah. I mean, look what, this goes back to, Ed, what you talked about a few weeks ago with what's happening in China. I mean, this is China, right? They have, zero labor laws, and these guys are walking out because they had reached their tipping point.
Right.
So, I'm telling people out there, reach your tipping point. Find your tipping point. Stop taking it. You don't have to take it. Stand up.
Right.
Get it. Form a union. Form an association. Get together with some coworkers. Stop getting abused because it's not worth it. Every job, like you said, has dignity.
And you can do it. As we said at the top of the show, people are doing this every week across the state, across the city, across the country. It works, and it's not impossible. So, the year of the worker is young, but let's keep it going because we've got some great momentum so far.
You don't have to do it alone. There's unions out there. We know what to do. We can help.
Absolutely, we can help. And you can help yourselves, right? And we have the Workers' Rights Amendment here in Illinois that doesn't even mention the word union. It just says you guys have the right to collectively bargain. Go out and do it. Stand up. But, yeah, we can help. You're listening to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN. I'd like to thank Travis Ketterman for joining us today.
Thanks for the invite. It's always fun to talk.
It was awesome to hear everything you had to say,
Yeah,
Travis.
we really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
So we'll be back with you again next week, here on 720 WGN.